This morning, delivered by hand, Mr. Jukes found them in the office mail. Oh dear me, I'm terribly sorry. The Citroen Saxo. It was the car that I passed my test in, based on the Peugeot 106 and the Citroen AX. Well, is it any good in 2019? Should you care? Why, let's find out, shall we? Citroen, on y va! Vino!
Go home even if the sight of it has not yet touched our eyes. And here we are and we're together, even if we are apart. And we're together when we're together, something big is happening.
So welcome to yet another episode of Tweed Jacket Reviews. Today we're in Liverpool, and this is a 2002 Citroen Saxo 1.1 Desire. It's owned by Matty from Matty's Cars, who has his own channel on YouTube. I thoroughly recommend you watch his reviews because they're very funny, especially the ones featuring his character called Buster Cherry. So thanks, Matty. Thatty. Before we get into further depth for talking about the Citroen Saxo, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. It really helps us to make these reviews possible and helps us to get out content a bit quicker. The Citroen Saxo was first launched in 1996. The car that I passed my test in was actually part of the original press launch for it, and there were several of them. This particular car was N349 SAX, but N348 SAX was also a Saxo, which is how I found out about that. The car that I drove was a 1.1 SX 3-door, this is a 5-door, which had no power steering and possibly the most annoying immobiliser in the world. The keypad immobiliser on the early Saxos was down here where this big sort of hole is on this later car, and every time you started the engine you had to put a 4-digit key code in. It was possibly the most annoying thing I've ever seen on any car. The engines available in the Citroen Saxo were a 1 litre 50 horsepower engine, a 1.1 version of the same engine which had 60 horsepower, a 1.4 engine with 75 horsepower, and then there were several 1.6 litre engines. The most common one was a 90 horsepower 1.6 engine, which went into the automatic Saxo originally and the VTR. Later that was upgraded to 97 horsepower, and then you had the screaming and crazy Saxo VTS with 120 horsepower. There are also some diesels, but we don't talk about those. The trim levels available on the Saxo when it was launched in 1996 were X, SX, VSX, Furio, and then the two hot hatch versions, which were the VTR and the VTS. This is a post-facelift car, dated from 2002, and from 2000 the SX was renamed the Desire. In this particular car we've got electric windows, we've got the manual sunroof, we've got a CD player, and we've got central locking, but that doesn't seem to be working at the moment, and that's really about it. Oh, you've got a rear wiper, of course. One of the things that you didn't get on the earlier Saxos, in the sort of mid-range ones, like the one I learned to drive in, was power steering. This car's actually got power steering, and it is a revelation. I remember just how heavy and awful the steering was when I learned to drive. And although you got lots and lots of nice feel through the steering, which meant it was, you know, nice to drive in that kind of way, it was pretty annoying when you're trying to do a turn in the road. One of the things I don't really like about this car, and I'm sure it was the same back in 2000 when I first drove a Saxo, is the pedals are really offset to the left, and they are extremely annoying. They're tiny as well. I think this was probably designed for small Parisian ladies rather than me. The gearbox is okay. It's the typical kind of Peugeot Citroen fare, whereby it's a little bit floppy and it's a bit imprecise, but it's okay. You do get used to these things, obviously, after driven the car for a little bit longer. This car is actually in quite nice condition. It's only done around 72,000 miles, which is quite low for the year, and these cars are actually pretty rare. If you don't want to modify one, or one that's been absolutely trashed, then they're pretty uncommon. And as a sort of, I suppose, a starter classic now, because they're getting to that age, it's worth considering. The ride and handling of this car are all right. The ride's a little bit crashy, but then this is what cars of this era were like. The handling does feel quite precise. The steering's really nice, actually. It's quite a pleasant surprise. On this sort of slow speed like this, you do feel a lot of the bumps, but you know, that's the case with many cars of this age. Overall, it's actually surprisingly nice to drive once you get used to these pedals. Wow, this car has given me that really warm, nostalgic feeling. Those pedals, though, are incredibly annoying. Anyway, that's enough about that. Let's look at some practicality and look in the boot. This is a 5-door Saxo. The one I like to drive in was a 3-door. So this is a more practical car anyway. But if we open the boot, just over 200 litres of space in here. Like on a Peugeot 205 and some of the other French cars of the 80s and 90s, the spare wheel's not actually in the boot. It's actually underneath the floor, which means it's a prime target for thieves. Compared with a modern car, there's not a lot to talk about in terms of this boot. The parcel shelf has been very skillfully repaired by Matty. We also see someone's been eating at McDonald's. There is a jack here for getting that spare wheel out, but the only other thing in here is the boot light. There's no 12-volt socket, there's no shopping bag hooks. For the class of car though, the boot's really not that bad. If I attempt to get into the back, it is a bit like getting into a Ford Capri. There's really not much room in here. By kind of standards of the 1990s, this isn't too bad, but I mean, my head's right up against the roof, my knees are right up against my seat. This is my driving position, by the way. I'm 5'11". No Saxos, as far as I know, came with electric rear windows, so this is what you're going to be doing an awful lot if you sit in the back. There's no armrest, there's no 12-volt socket. The seats do fold though. That's pretty easy. That's not much of a problem. But overall, it's not particularly somewhere I'd like to spend a huge amount of time. The materials in this car are very typical of Peugeots and Citroens of the 1990s. They're very sort of flimsy, but you know, this hasn't fallen off yet. Hard plastic. You do get some material on the door card, which is good. Handle feels a bit cheap, but then this was a cheap car. Stepping into the front of the car, I found a little something that belongs to a certain famous celebrity. So we'll use these from now on. The cabin of the Saxo is very familiar to anyone who's had a Peugeot or Citroen from the 80s or 90s. It's all very kind of dark. It's not that interesting. The switches don't feel particularly solid. But one thing that's really good about this car is the size of it. The visibility is extremely good. You don't need a reversing camera. You don't need parking sensors, which is just as well because you couldn't get parking sensors on any model of a Saxo at all. So I've got here my secret mission documents. We'll try to put these in the glove box, which, oh dear, I don't think it's going to work. This car is no good for smuggling documents over the border. Let's try to put these now into the door pocket, and that actually fits quite well. The door pockets aren't too bad. The only thing I can't find in here is any cup holders at all. I don't think this car has cup holders either. It's a bit funny though, because you'd think that somebody from France would be drinking their wine on the way to the supermarket. This Desire model, which is similar to the pre-facelift SX, doesn't really have much in the way of equipment. I do have electric windows, and they are in a really weird place, just in front of the gear lever here. There's no air conditioning, and no UK models of Saxo came with air conditioning. There's loads of these blanked out switches. I can't imagine what on earth they needed to have 4 blank switches in a row here. It's a bit strange. Anyway, yes, and then there's these classic kind of Peugeot Citroen column stalks here for the horn and the lights, and here for the wipers. It's actually pretty straightforward. The instruments are very clear and easy to read as well. And they've got this kind of funny blue sort of colour. I wonder if it's red, white and blue like the tricolor. The heated controls are actually the same as on a facelifted Citroen AX, which just shows you how old this car was by the time it was made in 2002. It's simple enough to use, but the switches don't feel particularly nice. But then again, I don't think switches in a cheap car in 2002 did feel particularly nice, with possible exception of the Volkswagen Polo. We've also got a CD player here. It's the original CD unit. That's good to see that's still here. We've got these sort of funny looking vents which sort of move back and forth in a way that I've never seen before, which is pretty good. We've also got this manual sunroof. That's quite nice and handy. And that really is about it, viewers. The gear lever falls quite nicely to hand. The handbrakes also in a good position. The other thing about a car like this, though, is, you know, very common with something of this era. There is no steering wheel adjustment whatsoever, and the seat I don't think goes up and down at all. So if you don't like this driving position, then you're pretty much stuck with it. Also, the pedals are really offset. They're really far offset to the left, and it's a little bit uncomfortable if you're not used to it. So then, what do I think of this marvellous Citroen Saxo? Well, I do have a warm nostalgic glow about this car, but back in 2002, this car was certainly not at the top of its class, and it certainly isn't now. It's really more like a kind of a classic. They're so rare now in this kind of condition, but actually you might be interested in driving around in one as a usable modern classic. Anyway, oh, dear me, I'm terribly sorry. There have been attempts by several parties to prevent it. If we continue...
Well, what do I think about this Citroen Saxo? Well, it's quite a comfortable car, but it depends really on how you like your driving position, because that's not really its strong point. Not a lot of adjustment in the seat or the steering wheel. It's not a very heavy car, so it's quite nippy, quite good. And for a sort of different car, if you want a different car, something that you don't see a lot of on the road, because there isn't an awful lot of them left, then it's quite a good choice if you just want something a bit different.
Thank you for watching this episode of Tweed Jacket Reviews. My name is Joseph Lloyd. I'm an independent vehicle consultant. I find cars for people. Please subscribe to the channel if you'd like to do that. Don't forget to like this video and to leave a comment below. If you wish me to source a car for you, I'd love to do that. My website is www.lloydvehicleconsulting.co.uk. Please use the Contact Me page on my website to get in touch. I've got a Facebook page as well. It's facebook.com/Lloyd Vehicle Consulting. Thank you. It's a bit funny though, because you'd think that somebody from France would be drinking their wine on the way to the supermarket.